Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why in how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for lending me your ears. Today, we're going to continue the conversation on upsell conversation starters. In the last podcast, I covered the first three. I'm going to give you three more, maybe more if I can. Let's see how it goes with the time here. The next one, upsell phrase number 4, is earlier on, I told you about. Earlier on, I told you about. So again, you're in a conversation with the customer. You're moving towards the close. The customer's already pretty much made the decision to buy X product or X service. That's your moment to try to move an upsell when you know they've made that first commitment to make the first purchase, right? So we're looking for the second sale, also known as the upsell. So what you want to say is, early on, I told you about. Now, the early on, I told you about phrase, it's almost like, it's what I call a callback, or I should say comedians call it callback. And that is, a callback is, you dropped an anchor earlier on in the conversation, and as the conversation progressed towards the end, you remind them, you call back to what you mentioned earlier. That's what I mean by a callback. The way comedians use it is that they'll say something, let's say in the first 5 minutes, 20 minutes later, they tie it back to that reference they made early on in the conversation. In sales, it's no different. You can anchor or condition a buyer early on in the conversation, and then towards the end, when you're going for the second sale, they've already committed to the first, you want to upsell them, you can use a callback strategy by using that phrase. Early on, I told you about. Now, that's a powerful phrase. When you mention that, early on, I told you about X, and then again, you hearken back to that, and you're able to tie that down. And it seems natural because you already mentioned it earlier. That's what's powerful about that phrase. Earlier on, I mentioned that this product right here is what you'll need to do X, Y, Z. Here's why I think it's critical. Remember, you always want to add the why, the reason, to help them justify and rationalize the buy, the upsell, okay? So, upsell phrase number 5, if I were you, or if it were mine to do. So you got two options there. If it were me, or if I were you, if it were mine to do. So if I were you, or if it were mine to do, then again, this is a phrase that basically says to the buyer, this is what you would do. See, buyers often want your advice. What would you do? If you were in their situations, what would you do? So they're looking for you to say something like this. You say to the customer, look, if it were me, and again, you can use any variation of this. If it were me, if I were you, or if it were mine to do, any variation works. But let's go with, look, if it were me, here's what I would do. And here's why. And the more personal you can make that phrase, again, what you're trying to do is create a personal buying experience, when they're consuming that product or service that you're trying to sell them. And by letting them know that, hey, this is what I would do, it's just much more impactful in your upsell and in your pitch, because they want to know you're the expert, you're the domain expert, you're the person that understands the product or service better than they do. They want your opinion. So again, a nice way to glide into this conversation on an upsell. They've made a decision to buy the first product, right? Let's say product X. You're trying to upsell them on some accessories, some add-ons, whatever it may be. And right before you ring them up, right before you let them cut the check, right before they write up the PO or the final proposal, you said, if I were you, what I would do is I would also add this right here, and here's why. Do you see how nice and natural that sounds? If I were you. Or again, if you want to be more removed, if it were mine to do. If I were you versus if it were mine to do. Either way, make it sound casual. And I always want to emphasize, tone is very important in how you deliver these lines. If I were you, if it were mine to do. Practice those lines. All right, next upsell phrase, number 6. If you're going to ... So this is a conditional upsell conversation phrase. A customer is considered buying, let's say, a specific product and has pretty much committed. They're in and is ready to execute the purchase, right? They're ready to lay down the credit card or sign the proposal. And in the back of your mind, the sale is done, right? So it's already done, but you could offer them something better. So what you say is, if you're going to buy this, you might as well get this. here's why. Let me run that back again. Again, the phrase is if you're going to. So if you're going to buy X, you might as well buy Y. Here's why. Okay? Didn't mean for that to sound like that. 2 Ys. It sounds weird. I'll do it again. If you're going to buy product X, you might as well buy product Z, and here's why you should do it. And again, the more compelling you can make the why, the upsell conversation phrase is powerful, but when you can add a strong why, different reason or reasons why they should do that, that makes it that much more powerful. All right, I'm going to give you one more. Upsell phrase number 7. You mentioned earlier that. That's the phrase. You mentioned earlier that. Now, listening to your customer is key when it comes to upselling. Listen for those little things that will help you later on in the sales presentation process. Now, you can say that, then you can say something like this. You mentioned earlier that you do a lot of presentations. Let me show you what we have that will help you enhance your presentation. Again, the customer will appreciate the fact that, one, you were actually listening to what they were saying, but you also come across as earnest. I'm just trying to help you, with sincerity, because that's what selling is, right? Selling is all about trying to match up people with your products or services that help them, not just to sell them. We want to help them get to where they're going. So again, the upsell phrase here is, you mentioned earlier that. Great listening skills for this one is required. So listen carefully, and then when you find the moment, when you know they're pretty much committed to buying X product, you say, you mentioned earlier that you do a lot of presentations. In this example, let's say I'm buying a microphone. Let's just say I'm buying a microphone. To give you a real example, I'm over at, Best Buy or Guitar Center, and I'm buying a microphone. And they also want to sell me, let's say, the pop filter that comes in front of the microphone, or some foam that goes around it just so I get better sound. So again, the salesperson may say, I think I'm going to go with that microphone. And the salesperson might say, hey, Victor, you mentioned earlier that, you're going to do a lot of podcasts. So let me show you what we have that will enhance not only the microphone, but your voice and your podcast. And here's why I really want you to look at it. Now, all of a sudden, they mentioned the pop filter, the foam, and they'll talk about the crunchiness I'll get, the clean sounds, and that's why you might want to consider doing this. And again, that's very powerful. So I gave you 4 different upsell conversation starters. The first one which was upsell phrase number 4, earlier on, I told you about. Again, it's a callback, right? Earlier on, I told you about . Upsell phrase number 5, if I were you, or if it were mine to do, if it were me, again, upsell phrase number 6, if you're going to buy X, you might as well buy Y, here's why. And then upsell phrase number 7, you mentioned earlier that, and again, good listening skills, you mentioned earlier that. So begin practicing these upsell phrases, and I'm going to do a part 3, so we'll see you in part 3. But in the meantime, practice these upsell phrases till they become comfortable and you know when to drop them at the right time in any given sales conversation. And that is it for the Sales Influence Podcast. Don't forget to leave me some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Let me know what you think. I greatly appreciate it. Also, check out my online sales training platform, the Sales Velocity Academy. Go to salesvelocityacademy.com. If you want to sell more faster, that's where you go. Over 50 courses, 500 videos. It is worth the money. Lastly, I want to thank you for listening. This is Victor Antonio, always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care. Hi, I'm Victor Antonio. I'm an author, sales trainer, and keynote speaker. I'm often asked, what makes a great speaker? Is it someone who delivers real content that the audience can use? Is it someone who engages the audience so they're part of the learning experience? Or is it someone who can motivate an audience to push them beyond their comfort zone and discover new abilities? The answer is yes. But the most important thing to remember is that I'm not there to look good. I'm there to make my client look good. Simply put, it's never about me, and it's always about them.